Okay, a book called A Tour Guide in History of Colonel John Singleton Mosby's Combat Operations in Fairfax County, Virginia. So this is a book that we've written about the Civil War, has about 100 stories in it, but we are going to share 4 of them tonight, 2 by myself and 2 by my partner here, Don. So let me go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to start with a story about the formation of Mosby's Independent Command. So going into the winter of 1862 and into the second year of the war, John Singleton Mosby was serving under JEB Stuart, and they were in winter quarters along the Rappahannock River south of Fredericksburg. Mosby did not like sitting around in camp with the regular army. He was afraid that the oncoming winter season would greatly curtail his hope of seeing any kind of action, much less giving him a chance to form his independent command, or to form an independent command, which is what he really wanted to do. He actually hated being in the regular army because they sat around for long periods of time not doing anything. And so far, JEB Stuart, had not given his blessing for Mosby to break off on his own. So Mosby's raiding, however, had been reduced to scouring the countryside for chickens, turkeys, ham, sweet potatoes, butter, and eggs for Christmas Eve festivities. He actually sat down and wrote a letter to his wife, Pauline, asking her to send him a number of books to read. But fortunately for Mosby, Stuart had other ideas. As Stuart announced marching orders before dawn on Christmas Day, his 1,800 men were given 1 hour to collect their rations and to saddle up. Stuart had orders from General Robert E. Lee to march from Fredericksburg all the way to Washington to disrupt General Ambrose Burnside's communications and supply lines. That day, Stuart and his men crossed the Rappahannock River at Kelly's Ford. Despite the snow and icy winds, Mosby was glad just to relieve the monotony. This operation would be known as the Christmas Raid. The raiders proceeded to pass Quantico, Dumfries, and Occoquan, and on December 27th, captured some 170 federal prisoners and numerous supply wagons. Arriving at Burke Station, which is in Burke, on the 28th, Stuart also captured the telegraph office and listened to the federal messages concerning his location and route. He paused here at Burke Station and sent a message to the quartermaster in Washington, complaining of the poor condition of the mules he had just captured and was using to pull his captured wagons. He wrote, he telegraphed to the Quartermaster General Meigs, United States Army, quality of the mules lately furnished me very poor, interferes seriously with the movement of captured wagons. JEB Stuart. So this was kind of interesting. Stuart got on the telegraph. He was listening to the federal officers talking about him, and here he is sending them a telegraph back to them. So Burke Station, let me find Burke Station myself, is down here at the bottom of the map. I don't know if you can see my pointer or not. So he's down there at Burke Station. So he wanted to head towards Fairfax Courthouse, a little bit northwest, where he hoped to attack the Union garrison. But the federal soldiers already knew he was coming, and they halted and they gave him heavy fire and halted his advance and forced him to go either further northwest to the familiar areas of Falls Church and Vienna. So Stuart had come as close as he could to the Union forces guarding the city of Washington. So he decided to halt his attack and go a little bit further north along the tracks of the now not being used Alexandria, Loudon, and Hampshire Railroad, which is today's W&OD Trail. Upon reaching Herndon, the little village of Herndon, he turned south on the Centerville Road and decided to drop in on some of his old friends to see how they were doing. On there, Mosby himself uh, crossed Hunter Mill Road at Hunter Station Road, moving away from Fairfax Courthouse. And of course, these roads are still here today. From Hunter's Mill Road, Captain John Singleton Mosby accompanied JEB Stuart and a few of his officers on a visit to the house of Miss Laura Ratcliffe, located on Centerville Road, 1.5 miles from Frying Pan Church. Laura was a loyal Confederate civilian whom Stuart had met while she tended to his wounded soldiers at his headquarters a few miles away after the Battle of Drainesville in late December 1861. The conversation was recorded that night. Stuart called in company with several of us to make a visit to Miss Laura Ratcliffe, who resided near Frying Pan Church in Fairfax County. As our party rose to bid this lady farewell, I was surprised and pleased to hear the general address her in the following language. You are such good Southern people through this section. I think you deserve some protection. So I shall leave Captain Mosby with a few men to take care of you. I want you to do all you can for him. He's a great favorite of mine and a brave soldier. And if my judgment does not err, we shall hear something surprising from him. It wasn't until the next day, however, on December 30th, that Stuart actually left Mosby with his first 9 men to take care of the good Southern people throughout this section, as Stuart had promised Laura. Stuart and Mosby had traveled west from Laura's house into Loudoun County and were staying at the home of Colonel Hamilton Rogers, called Oakham, which is still located there on today's Oakham Farm Lane in Aldie. As Stuart left with his men on the 30th, he left Mosby with 9 men. Stuart reached his headquarters back in Fredericksburg on January 1st. So Mosby now began exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to act as a partisan ranger, having an independent command, and he would return many times to visit, protect, and gather intelligence from Laura throughout the last 2.5 years of the war. She would repay him by saving his life less than 2 months later. On one of Mosby's first raids in February of '63, literally 2 months later, he met a number of his men at his headquarters in Rector's Crossroads in Fauquier County and started towards Fairfax County. At the same time, a large number of Union troops were hiding in a grove of pine trees near Frying Pan Church, with a small number of men were picketing at a nearby crossroads. The plan was to entice Mosby to attack the small number of pickets who were out in the open, and then the bulk of the Union soldiers would rush from their hiding places in the woods and capture Mosby and his men. Unfortunately for the plan, a young Union soldier came to Laura's house to buy milk and eggs, and trying to impress the attractive Southern woman, boasted openly about the trap, saying, "We'll get Mosby this time. On his next raid, he will certainly come to Frying Pan, and it will not be possible for him to escape." Mosby, as you can tell, in 2 short months, has started to make a name for himself, and he frequently came from Loudoun or Fauquier County into the western portion of Fairfax County where Laura lived. So he was starting to make a name for himself. As soon as the soldier left, Laura and her sister left despite the cold and mud to warn local sympathizers to watch for Mosby. They walked north on Centerville Road for 3 miles to the home of their brother, here shown as the Coleman house, which is located in today's World Gate Shopping Center. While at her brother-in-law's house, she saw cavalry through a window and went out to see who they were. As the riders approached, she was alarmed that they may be Union soldiers, as she saw blue uniforms. But she recognized the lead rider as John Underwood, fellow resident of Frying Pan, followed by Mosby. It turned out that Mosby's men were wearing captured Union coats. Laura had come literally in the nick of time. The Union plan was working. Mosby was already aware of the pickets and was preparing to attack. Warned by Laura and her sister, Mosby, however, changed his plans and safely rode away. He wrote about this encounter in a book. He said, "We then proceeded on towards Frying Pan, where I heard that a cavalry picket was stationed and waiting for me to come after them. I did not want them to be disappointed in their desire to visit Richmond. When I'd got within a mile of it and had stopped for a few minutes to make my disposition for attack, I observed two ladies walking rapidly toward me. One was Miss Laura Ratcliffe, a young lady to whom Stuart had introduced me a few weeks before when returning from his raid on Dumfries with her sister. Their home was near Frying Pan, and they had got information of a plan to capture me and were just going to the house of a citizen to get him to put me on my guard, where fortune brought them across my path. But for meeting them, my life as a partisan would have closed that day. This is not the only time in the war I owed my escape from danger to the tact of a Southern woman. Mosby would frequently stop at Laura's house during the rest of the war for information, food, and a place to rest many times. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Don, who's going to tell you about the famous Fairfax Courthouse raid.
Well, first of all, can you all hear me? This is one of the first times I've done a Zoom.
Sure can. Yes, you are good.
That sounds good. I'm going to talk about the Fairfax Courthouse raid that occurred early in the morning on the 9th of March of 1863. And it was this raid that made John Singleton Mosby a legend. As you can see the picture on the left, that's John Singleton Mosby, and he would start his guerrilla operations in Northern Virginia in January of 1863. And he started out with 9 men, then he went to 15 men, then he formed a company, then he formed a battalion. So it kept getting bigger and bigger because he was becoming more successful at what he was doing. During the months of January and February and March of 1863, John Singleton Mosby and his Rangers are becoming a pain in the side to the Union authorities. And they're starting to get a little bit tired of this guy. And the Union commander at Fairfax Courthouse is this gentleman on the right, and his name is Colonel Sir Percy Wyndham. He is a English adventurer. He had served in Austria. He had fought with Garibaldi, and he was friends with General McClellan. So he came to the United States and volunteered his services, and they put him in the Union Cavalry. Now he's the cavalry commander of Fairfax Courthouse, and he's getting a little sick and tired of this Mosby fella. All of a sudden, a person asked him, "So, well, what do you think of Mosby?" He says, Mosby's nothing but a horse thief." And Mosby read that comment, and he said, "I'm going to pay this guy Wyndham a visit, and I'm going to gobble him up." This house right here, you see, this is the home of Lorman Chancellor. He was the mayor of Middleburg, and Mosby is going to have a dinner here on the 8th of March of 1863 before he decides to go into Fairfax Courthouse. As he's finished his dinner, he walks out and he mounts his horse and he writes in his memoirs, and he had this beautiful quote that he put in his memoirs, and I'd love to say it. He says, "I shall mount the stars tonight or sink lower than plummet ever sounded." Sounded Shakespearean. He was a highly educated man. I don't know if he really said that or not, but it was really cool, and I wanted to make sure I gave that quote today. Mosby would then leave Middleburg, and he would ride out to a place named Dover, and he would pick up 29 of his men that he had chosen for this specific mission. He wants to go into Fairfax Courthouse late at night, and he wants to capture Sir Percy Wyndham. Mosby and his men would enter Fairfax from the southern side, from the south, and they would actually come in on the Chain Bridge Road, and they would make themselves right into Fairfax Courthouse. They would actually capture a couple pickets on their way in. A picket is just a guard, for those people who may not know what a picket is. It's a Union guard. And Mosby would make his way to the courthouse, and he would capture several more Union soldiers, and he would also capture a telegrapher. But the person that he wanted to go after was Sir Percy Wyndham, who was staying at the Thomas Murray house. Chuck, can you show where that is on the map? He wants to go to the Thomas Murray house. He believes that's the headquarters for Sir Percy Wyndham. So he makes his way up to the Thomas Murray house, and he finds out that Sir Percy Wyndham has changed his headquarters to Judge Thomas's house, which is a building they had passed on the way in. But he had captured a private. And this private had told him that staying nearby was Brigadier General Edward H. Stoughton, a brigadier general, and he was staying at the Dr. William Pressley Gunnell house. As soon as Mosby found out about this brigadier general, he could care less about Sir Percy Wyndham. He would identify one of his men, a guy by the name of Big Yankee or James F. Big Yankee Ames. He was a Union deserter who had served with the 5th New York Cavalry, but he had joined Mosby's command, and Mosby would tell him to go to Judge Thomas's house and capture the good colonel. Mosby would take 5 men, and he would go over to the Dr. William Pressley Gunnell house, and his mission is to capture this brigadier general. This picture on the left is a picture of the William Pressley Gunnell house. That's what it looked like in 1863. It's a little different now, and we've got a picture to show you what it looked like. Mosby would actually ride up to the house. He would leave 2 of his men to hold the horses. He would take 3 other rangers, and he would walk up to the door. He pounds on the door, and he says, "5th New York Cavalry, I have urgent dispatches for the general. I need to see him now." And he's banging on the door. And finally, a window opens on the 2nd floor, and it's the aide to General Stoughton. His name is Lieutenant Prentice. And he says, "What's going on down there?" And he says, "5th New York Cavalry, I have dispatches for the general. I need to see him right away." And the aide to General Stoughton would go down the steps and make a critical mistake. He would open the door. Mosby would put a pistol to his chest and say, "Take me to the general." And Prentice would lead him upstairs into the room where General Stoughton is sound asleep in bed. Stoughton had been at a party the night before, and there is champagne bottles and wine bottles and fruit located throughout the room. And Mosby tries to awaken the young general. Let me tell you a little bit about General Stoughton. General Stoughton is 24 years old. He is the youngest general in the Union Army. He is a brigade commander, and his unit is at Fairfax Station. He should have been with his men, but instead he stays at Fairfax Courthouse, and he would pay for that mistake. Mosby tries to awaken him, but he had apparently drank too much, and then Mosby pulls out his gauntlets, and he pulls up the bed shirt, and he gives General Stoughton a whack. Now the general is up, and he's going, what's going on? What's happening here? And Mosby bends down, and he says, "Have you heard of Mosby?" And he says, "Yes, have you captured him?" And Mosby says, "I am Mosby, and I have captured you." Can you imagine what General Stoughton thought at that moment? Mosby tells him he's got to hurry up and go. We've got to get out of here. And he starts looking at General Stoughton, and he's taking his time getting dressed, and he's looking in the mirror, and he's really trying to look really good. And Mosby says, "We don't have time for this." And Mosby would write in his memoirs that he called General Stoughton a fop. Ladies and gentlemen, the picture on the right is Brigadier General Edwin H. Stoughton, the fop. The house you see on the left, this is what the Dr. William Pressley Gunnell house looks like today. As you can see, they've added 2 rooms on the right-hand side of the building, and it is still there. There's a marker out there that talks about that this was the house that Ranger John Mosby captured Brigadier General Edwin Stoughton in bed on the night of March 9th of 1863. This is a marker that they placed in Fairfax County in Fairfax Courthouse in 1997, and it talks about the raid. One of the interesting things about the raid is Mosby would capture a brigadier general, 2 captains, 30 enlisted men, 58 horses, without a single shot being fired. Abraham Lincoln would find out about the raid at Fairfax Courthouse, and he would say, "I can replace a general with a stroke of a pen, but each one of those horses cost me $125. You got to love Abraham Lincoln. The next raid I want to talk about occurred at the Rose Hill Manor House, which is located off of Franconia Road, and it occurred early in the morning on September the 28th of 1863. This is the provisional governor of the state of Virginia, Francis H. Pierpont. Now, a lot of Virginians, they called him the pretend governor, or some of them even called him the bogus governor. Why do you think Virginians called him the bogus governor or the pretend governor? I'm going to tell you why. The real governor of Virginia was in Richmond. And this man was appointed by Abraham Lincoln. And the only thing that he really commanded was the town of Alexandria. And a lot of Virginians did not like this man, and they wanted to capture him. And one of the men that wanted to go after him was John Singleton Mosby. On the 28th of September of 1863, John Singleton Mosby and about 5 Rangers actually made it into the town of Alexandria. And they went to the city hotel where Francis Pierpont was staying. I don't know how many people know it, but the city hotel is actually Gadsby's Tavern, which is where George Washington used to go when he was alive and visiting in Alexandria. So Gadsby's Tavern and the city hotel is the same place. Mosby would find out that Pierpont is not there. He's been called into Washington City by Abraham Lincoln. And again, Lincoln has saved his bacon. Mosby would take his men. He would leave Alexandria. He would go out to a trestle right outside the city of Alexandria, and he would destroy that trestle. Mosby has now received intelligence, staying at the Rose Hill Manor House, which actually was still here until about 1965, is staying the aide to Francis Pierpont, and his name is Colonel Daniel Delaney. Colonel Delaney has a son by the name of French Delaney who rides with Mosby. Have you heard about brother against brother? How about father against son? Anne Froebel, who wrote a diary about the war, she talked about what occurred at the Rose Hill Manor House. She talked about how they went there late at night, somewhere early in the morning, between 1 and 2 in the morning. And she talks about how Mosby made it up to the second floor bedroom and walks in and he says, Mosby, Colonel Delaney is in bed. French Delaney, his son, walks into the room, sees his father, and he says, Pa, it's good to see you. And his father, knowing his son is a Mosby Ranger, says, well, it's not good to see you. Can you imagine? The first time he'd seen his son for over a year and a half, and he has to greet him that way. I guess he started feeling bad, so he tells French, he said, you know, downstairs, there's some old shoes, and I know how scarce they are in the Confederacy. And French Delaney had been out on a raid just a week before, and he had captured a sutler's wagon full of leather goods, which a sutler's wagon is a Union wagon that sells goods. It's like a moving store. And they had captured these leather goods, and French Delaney pulled up his pant legs and he showed his father these brand new Union boots and said something to the effect, courtesy of the US government. There was a painting that was done by John Paul Strain. John Paul Strain read a story that I wrote about the Rose Hill raid, and he painted it. And he had no pictures of what Colonel Delaney or French Delaney looked like, but he put them in the painting anyway. And he created his own image of these two men. And I think if you look, the one thing that John Paul Strain did is he made their noses the same to try to show that they were related. Chuck. One of the things I wanted to talk about is Mosby would take Colonel Delaney. He would make his way through Vienna, get back to Fauquier County. He would send him to Richmond, and he would be placed in the Castle Thunder. And he would stay there until he was exchanged until March of 1864. He would come back to Alexandria. He would actually help the citizens there. And after the war, he would become clerk of the court of Fairfax County. So he was a very reputable man. French Delaney, his son, who helped Mosby capture his own father, was involved in a fight in May of 1864 with the 2nd Massachusetts Cavalry, and he would be mortally wounded and would die a short time later. But there's a sad tale to this story, and the sad tale is that both of these men, 150 to 160 or 175 years later, nobody knows where they're buried today. And that is a sad tale, because one of the things we like to do when we find the final resting place of a Confederate or a Union soldier is we want to put a marker at their graves. And so if there's any genealogists out here that's listening to this program and you should happen to come upon the final resting places of either one of these two men, please let me know. At this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck Mauro.
Thank you very much, Don. So Don just talked about French Delaney being killed in a raid in Herndon. So I'm going to finish our fourth story tonight and talk about Herndon. I'm going to talk about a raid that Mosby made on Herndon, March 17th, 1863. And I like talking about this particular raid because we have an eyewitness account by one of the civilians who lived in Herndon at the time. So on March 17th, 1863, St. Patrick's Day, Captain John Singleton Mosby and his men made a raid on a Union outpost near the Herndon train station on the Alexandria-Loudon, New Hampshire Railroad. A Union picket post had been deployed near the train station, consisting of 25 men under Lieutenant Alexander Watson of the 1st Vermont Cavalry. At noon, Mosby approached the station with 40 men from out of the woods and came upon the pickets who were stationed around a sawmill. Watson's men saw Mosby coming, but as they had been on picket duty for 48 hours, they thought it was a Union relief party. Mosby's men were wearing blue overcoats over their gray uniforms, which confirmed their belief. The Union soldiers did not realize their mistake until Mosby's men made their charge, quickly capturing most of them, the rest electing to surrender. As the Confederate soldiers, Mosby's men, were leaving the sawmill, they noticed 4 horses just up the road, tied in front of Nathaniel Hanna's residence, who was a known Union man. The horses belonged to Major Wells, Captain Schofield, Lieutenant Cheney, and Lieutenant Watson himself, all of the 1st Vermont Cavalry. Wells, Schofield, and Cheney had ridden to Herndon Station earlier that day to investigate the charges that the Union pickets had been stealing from the local citizens, which was a typical pursuit at that time. Watson was already there on duty, as I mentioned. The 4 officers had stopped at Nathaniel Hanna's house and had been inside eating a meal provided by Hanna's wife, Kitty Kitchen Hanna, who was a loyal Southerner, when they noticed Mosby's men in front of the residence. Cheney and Watson rushed out only to be captured. Wells and Schofield tried to hide in the attic. One of Mosby's Rangers fired a shot through the ceiling, calling for their surrender, causing Major Wells to fall through the ceiling directly into the hands of his captors. After the war, Wells and Schofield actually returned to reclaim their guns, which they had left hidden in the woods. As I mentioned, it was Kitty Kitchen Hanna, who was providing the dinner, and she actually wrote an account of what happened that day from her perspective. She wrote, "Never shall I forget that St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 1863, or them pies. As I turned from serving the pies, I cast my eyes out the window and I saw a-comin' a squad of grays. The rebel yell was no louder than my own scream, the Southerns, as they came tearing down the hill, and every man at the table ran to the front door. The worst thing to do, to show themselves. And then the bullets just rained on our house. The Yankees ran inside, and I thought they was going to fight it out, but they buckled on sabers, and they followed my brother-in-law up the stairway till I cried out in terror, 'Gentlemen, go outside, or I shall be murdered in my own house.' Watson was a Vermonter who was never seen again in these parts. The other 2 officers followed my brother-in-law into the attic, which was floored all over and had a big brick chimney running through the roof. Behind the chimney was a dark cuddy protected by a closet on one side, with only 3 boards for flooring. The 3 men crawled in there, and as they was hiding, Mother and me ran over to Betsy Allen's. So Kitty Kitchen gets out of the house. She runs to her neighbor's house. She said, I looked down towards the mill as I left, and I saw the line of boys in blue standing with their sabers up, and I felt they should all be killed. So I turned my back not to see it. leaving those men hiding in the attic. We could hear the Southerners rush into the house, shooting and a banging, and I felt certain no one would be left alive. What did happen, my brother-in-law told me afterwards. Mosby's men rushed upstairs calling to surrender, which as the bullets whizzed around, they decided to do, and they was taken prisoner of war. Nate's brother was left there, him not being in the army, her brother-in-law, and also known to Mosby's men who took off with the Yankee officers and their beautiful horses to someplace beyond the Union lines. I went creeping home, expecting to see dead men at every step, but I found none. Here's a picture of Kitty Kitchen well after the war, and another picture of Mosby. She also wrote that within a couple of weeks, Mosby's men rode by again, stopping in Herndon Station across the street from Kitty's house. But the leader rode into our yard and left his horse standing and knocked at the front door. Madam, he says, I came to apologize to you for my men shooting at your house a week or so back. So they did, I replied, but said no more. Can you let me have a newspaper to read, madam? There was a pile inside, but I answered, no, sir, I can't. Mosby was too polite to insist, and he turned and walked away. I never saw him again, but in his book, he called me a Union woman. He little knew how my heart was torn to pieces. I wished harm to nobody and cared for many a soldier, Northern and Southerner alike. I grew nervous seeing scouts at all hours and soldiers rushing by with bayonets pointed at my home. Let that pass and bygones be bygones. What is interesting is that Kitty Kitchen Hannah's husband, Nathaniel, was the brother of Laura Ratcliffe's husband, Milton Hannah. It was a small world for the residents in Herndon during the Civil War. So that's it for our 4 stories. Let me stop here and ask if anybody has any questions.
Unmuted all of the participants, so if you do have questions, feel free to unmute your microphones and have at it. So that last story, it's interesting that they did not have the blood trail that you would think that there was. Generally speaking, would you say they tried to spare folks when they were trying to kidnap, disrupt, and just do what he was doing with the raids?
Well, he was trying to capture them. And in this case, nobody was killed. As I said, two of the, what I didn't say about the sawmill was when Mosby captured the pickets outside the sawmill. The sawmill was what? Full of wood and shavings. So he just threatened to burn them all down unless they all surrendered. So in that case, all the men from Vermont surrendered because they were surrounded. And then Mosby had the upper hand there. And he goes to Kitty Kitchen Hannah's house. And as was said, 2 of them rushed out and were captured right away. They must have run out and then thrown up their arms when they saw how many of Mosby's men were there. And the other 2, Mosby, and another man ran upstairs. And one soldier, I love this story because he falls right through the ceiling into the hands of his captors. So I guess there was no need for any more firing after that. And even in the Rose Hill raid, I don't think anybody was killed, Don. Any stories there?
No, see, one of the things that Mosby always wanted to try to do is he tried to use a ruse, or he would try to trick his adversary, and his adversary being the Union Army. And anytime he could make them think that he had more people than he had, the better opportunities and the better successes he would have. He had a lot of Union soldiers surrender when he was really outnumbered. And John Singleton Mosby was a highly educated man. He went to the University of Virginia, but he was also very cunning. And if he could spare blood, he did. And you've got to respect him for that.
So I have a question that maybe I missed it or maybe it's not relevant, but when Mosby, so first of all, I thought it was very interesting that he went back to the one woman's house to apologize.
Yep.
You wouldn't think that would be normal. But when he asked if he could have a newspaper and she wouldn't give it to him, like why?
Well, the reason he asked was because the armies on both sides loved to read the newspapers to find out what was going on. Very, very frequently that was done. You know, it's interesting. You know, we can read about everything that's going on or everything that happened because all the stories have been collected uh, during about, and it's said that, many soldiers, even when they're in large battles, they only see what's happening right in front of them. So it was very frequent that they would read newspapers. So I think Mosby must have seen the pile of newspapers. He asked. Um, Kitty said no, and I think the reason she said no is because she didn't really want Mosby or any soldiers in her house or around her house. I think she was very anxious for him to leave. So that's why I think that's the way that happened there.
Okay, but
I just
and you
wanted to,
said that she was a Confederate
She
sympathizer?
was a Southern woman, but her husband was a Union man, and he was more of
Oh,
a
okay.
scout.
but
So
she still
Mosby
has Southern
knew,
sympathies.
yeah, yeah. So Mosby knew that it was in these towns there weren't that many people, and Mosby was very friendly, very familiar with Northern Virginia, having been stationed there earlier in the war before all his independent command started. And he was another thing that Mosby did was he always had people, local people. Mosby couldn't know everything about every location. How to get into a situation, how to get out of a situation, all the roads and all that. So he had local scouts working for him. And in the case of Herndon, he had John Underwood, who was actually a friend of Laura's, probably knew Kitty Kitchen and probably knew most of the people in Herndon. So he was able to provide intelligence about who was a Northerner, who was a Southerner, where a safe house was where Mosby and his men could stop. So they had quite a bit of intelligence on what was going on.
I just wanted to make one comment about the newspapers. There was no communications back in the 1860s, and the only way you found out about anything is if a courier came up and told you what was going on, or the newspapers. So the newspapers, whether they were Union papers or Confederate papers, they were really sought after, actually by both sides. Whether the information was correct or not, it's immaterial, but at least they got a feel of what was going on during the war. When I was in the Air Force, I was involved in human intelligence, and human intelligence is getting information from people and from newspapers and whatever news sources you could find. So the newspapers were very important, especially to John Singleton Mosby.
Any other questions?
Going back to the Delaney's over in Alexandria, the father-son duo, where was their original homestead?
They lived in Alexandria, in the city of Alexandria. The reason that Colonel Delaney was staying at the Rose Hill Manor House, the actual owner of the house was a guy by the name of Manadir Mason. And Manadir Mason was related to Daniel Delaney. The interesting thing about the Delaney family is everyone in the Delaney family fought for the South except for Colonel Daniel Delaney.
Do they know why that was?
He felt loyalty to the United States and to his government, where the rest of the people felt loyalty to their state.
Were they property owners, etc.?
He was a property owner. He was related to the Masons, George Mason. He was related to some of the most prominent families in Alexandria and in Northern Virginia.
It's fascinating that they don't know where they're buried then.
Yeah, it's. I've been trying to find his final resting place for over 30 years.
And it wouldn't have been on their property or anything else like that.
Well, see, there's a Colonel Delaney who fought for the 7th Virginia Cavalry that was from Fauquier County, and that was one of his relatives. And the report was, I found the document that he went to live with his relative, Colonel Delaney, who fought for Virginia and fought for the South. Even though he fought for the North, there was still strong family ties. But I can't find if he ended up dying in Loudoun County or not.
Okay.
To me, I think it's really interesting. I wrote a story about it. John Paul Strain, who's the Civil War artist that lives in Fort Worth, Texas, he read the story and liked the story so much that he made the painting of the Rose Hill raid. And I was still working for the Army at the time, and I came home and there was a message on my answering machine. And he said, "Don, this is John Paul Strain. Can you give me a call?" So I called him up and I said, what can I do for you? He says, I read your story and I painted the Rose Hill raid. I said, did you put the house in the painting? He said, no, I've got them by a little stream. They're getting water and Colonel Delaney is on a horse and his son has a revolver on. But it was still neat that
Yeah.
something that happened here in Fairfax County and especially in the Lee District near Franconia Road, there was a significant event that was so important that one of the most renowned Civil War artists in America painted that raid.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. So am I remembering it wrong, but was the Gunnell house also part of the first shot fired of the Civil War, not related to Mosby, or am I making that up? In other words, somebody was shot on the courthouse lawn, they ran out of the Gunnell house to the courthouse and the first casualty was right there at the courthouse, or am I making that up?
There was a fight. The very first military engagement occurred on the 1st of June of 1861. The Gunnell house was very close to where the fighting occurred. I don't know if Mr. Gunnell is documented as running out of the house, but he would have witnessed what happened there. But I don't remember him running out.
That wasn't
they had the
part of it.
150th anniversary of the fight there on the 1st of June of 1861. 150 years later, I was the narrator for that event, and I did a lot of research on that, and I can't find anything about Mr. Gunnell running out. However, the fighting occurred right in front of his house.
Right. Okay, then I had misheard it.
So this isn't related to any of the stories that you guys have told, but it kind of is a tangent off of what Tracy just asked. So I had heard, and I don't know if this is completely false, but that wherever the first shots were fired on the property of that person's home, that family had actually then moved because of the Civil War. They moved down to Appomattox, and it was then at that property, on their same property, is where the war ended. Is that true?
That's the Battle of Manassas.
Yep. Although in this case, it was Wilbur McLean.
Yep.
But it was the same family where the war started on his property and then it also ended on his property?
Yes, at the Battle of First Manassas, the first major land battle, which is July 21st. Right before that, there was a battle of Blackburn's Ford, and it was actually on his property. He owned a farm called Yorkshire, who he had purchased from a Colonel Blackburn, and that's why it was called Blackburn's Ford, I think in 1854. So he had a large farm. The battle was fought right across his property. Colonel Beauregard, I don't know if he was a colonel or not, but the head of the Confederate forces at First Manassas used McLean's house as his headquarters. So the battle was there. He was kind of evicted from his house. So he tried to move away, and he moves, down to Appomattox. And that, of course, is the famous house where Lee surrenders to Grant at the end of the war. What's also interesting, in 1867, McLean came back to try to his property, Yorkshire, but by then it was totally destroyed. He couldn't do it. So he became a real estate agent and tried to sell property in the Manassas area. And his lawyer, turns out, was his old friend, John Singleton Mosby, after the war. Because Mosby was an attorney before the war, and then he had a practice in Warrenton as an attorney after the war.
What's kind of interesting is Wilbur McLean is actually buried in Alexandria.
He moved to Alexandria after a while, correct?
So does he have any, is there a reason it happened on his properties, or was it just like complete and utter, like, worst luck ever?
You got it.
Ever.
You can't make this up. It's unbelievable when you think about it.
It is, because they're not even really that close to each other.
Nope.
No,
Look about
zero close to each other. I mean, it is
Right.
where it is where the Shenandoah Valley dumps out, etc. So do anybody else have any questions or just anecdotes that they'd like to share? Pam, Margaret, Rob, Bob? I guess that's it. So thank you both for being here. We kind of skipped your introductions. But if you guys would like more information, be sure to get up their website, which is not in front of me. I moved it. It's the HM Historical Society, correct?
HMShistory.com. Here,
HMS
I'll share that one more time.
Yeah, pop that up on your screen for us. I love your stories. I love that they're hyper local, and it's always fun seeing how that is. Thank you for putting up with the in motion live broadcast here. 95. We made it home. We're in the neighborhood, everyone. Hello, village. Is it popping up?
Yep.
Chuck, I don't see anything. Am I missing something?
No,
Oh, there it is.
It's right there. We got it.
Yeah,
So-
hmshistory.com and Amazon. Both of their books are there. They are multi-published, and if you want to check them out live, they'll be at the Elks Club tomorrow night with masks on. Okay, so with no further ado, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. We look forward to hearing your stories once again soon, okay?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you
having us.
so much, both of you.
Have a great evening.
You too.
Good night.
Bye-bye.